the silent partner. When the boss fired the company owner, she was the quiet IT manager who always worked late and never complained about toxic management. When the arrogant new CEO publicly fired her for not fitting company culture, everyone cheered his bold leadership. What nobody knew was that she owned 60% of the company, and her firing just gave her the perfect reason to shut everything down. Welcome back to Consequences & Co., where toxic bosses always fire the wrong person and workplace karma comes with unemployment checks for everyone. I'm your host, and today we're diving into the most explosive workplace revenge story that's been absolutely breaking the internet right now. This is about Rachel Morrison, a silent partner who watched a power-hungry CEO destroy the company she built, humiliate loyal employees, and make himself untouchable through fear. But when he crossed the line and fired her publicly, he gave her the legal right to expose everything and torch his career permanently. Hit that like button if you've ever watched a terrible boss destroy a good workplace, and let's see what happens when you fire someone who literally owns your job. Chapter 1. The Hostile Takeover. Rachel Morrison had co-founded TechBridge Solutions 10 years ago with her college roommate, turning a small software consulting firm into a $50 million business. But when her partner died suddenly from a heart attack 2 years ago, Rachel made a decision that would haunt her. She brought in professional management. Derek Hunt arrived as the new CEO with an MBA from Wharton, 15 years at Fortune 500 companies, and an ego that filled conference rooms. The board loved his aggressive growth strategy and his confidence that he could take TechBridge to the next level. What the board didn't know was Derek's real specialty, taking credit for other people's work while destroying anyone who threatened his authority. Rachel, who'd always preferred building technology over corporate politics, stepped back to focus on her role as IT director. She maintained her 60% ownership stake, but let Derek run daily operations while she managed the technical infrastructure that made everything possible. "You're too valuable in technology to waste time in meetings," Derek told Rachel during their first conversation, which Rachel foolishly took as respect rather than the manipulation it actually was. Over 18 months, Derek systematically transformed TechBridge's collaborative culture into a fear-based hierarchy. He fired senior employees and replaced them with inexperienced people who were too grateful for their jobs to question his decisions. He cut benefits, increased hours, and installed surveillance systems to monitor employee productivity. But Derek's real talent was taking credit for successes while blaming failures on others. When Rachel's team developed breakthrough automation software that landed a $5 million contract, Derek presented it to the board as his strategic vision. When a project failed due to Derek's impossible timeline, he blamed the incompetent technical team. Rachel watched silently as the company she'd built was slowly destroyed by someone who contributed nothing but toxic leadership. She documented everything, not because she planned revenge, but because she needed to understand how someone could be so systematically destructive. If you've ever had a boss who took credit for your work while destroying company culture, hit that like button and let me know in the comments about your toxic workplace experiences. Make sure you're subscribed because Derek is about to make the worst career decision imaginable. The breaking point came during a company-wide meeting where Derek announced new efficiency measures that included mandatory weekend work and reduced salaries for underperforming departments, which he defined as anyone who questioned his leadership. Chapter 2. The Public Humiliation. Derek's reign of terror reached its peak when he decided to make an example of someone to intimidate the entire company. His target was Rachel, the quiet IT director who never pushed back against his authority and seemed like the perfect victim. The setup was deliberate and cruel. Derek called an all-hands meeting and invited the entire company. 120 employees crowded into the main conference room to hear what they thought would be another announcement about company vision and growth opportunities. Instead, they witnessed a public execution. "I want to address a serious problem we've been having," Derek began, his voice carrying that false concern that narcissists use before destroying someone. "We have employees who think they're above company standards and don't need to participate in our culture of excellence." Rachel, sitting in the back of the room, knew immediately that she was about to become the target. "Rachel Morrison has been with this company a long time," Derek continued, making eye contact with her as employees turned to stare. "But tenure doesn't excuse laziness, resistance to change, or refusing to embrace the leadership direction that's making this company successful." The accusations were absurd and easily disproven. Rachel had been working 60-hour weeks maintaining the entire technical infrastructure, while Derek spent his time in strategy meetings that accomplished nothing. Effective immediately, Rachel Morrison is terminated for failure to meet performance standards and inability to adapt to professional workplace culture, Derek announced with theatrical finality. "Security will escort her out of the building. Let this be a lesson about accountability and excellence." The room was silent except for the sound of security guards approaching Rachel's seat. Several employees looked shocked and uncomfortable, but nobody spoke up. Derek's culture of fear had made them all too terrified to defend a colleague being publicly destroyed. Rachel stood calmly, gathered her laptop and phone, and walked toward the exit with security flanking her like she was a criminal being arrested. "I'll have my lawyer contact you about severance and final paycheck," Rachel said quietly as she reached the door. Derek smiled triumphantly. "Your lawyer can contact HR. You'll receive exactly what your performance deserves." What Derek didn't know was that Rachel's lawyer was actually the attorney who managed her 60% ownership stake in the company, and the termination he'd just executed had given Rachel the legal grounds to do something she'd been considering for months. Chapter 3: The Emergency Board Meeting. Rachel's attorney, Michael Chen, had been advising her for months about Derek's mismanagement and potential legal violations. But Rachel had been reluctant to use her ownership power to remove Derek, hoping he would either improve or be removed by the board through normal processes. Derek's public termination of a majority shareholder changed everything. "He just gave us grounds for immediate board action," Michael told Rachel during their emergency meeting the evening after her firing. "Terminating a majority shareholder without board approval violates company bylaws and potentially corporate law." But Rachel's revenge plan was more sophisticated than simply reinstating herself. Derek's 18 months of mismanagement had created documented evidence of toxic leadership, financial mismanagement, and potential fraud that would destroy his career permanently. "I want an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning," Rachel told Michael. "And I want every piece of evidence about Derek's mismanagement, including the surveillance footage from today's termination spectacle." Michael smiled grimly. "This is going to be spectacular." Rachel spent the night preparing a presentation that would expose Derek's complete incompetence and cruelty. She compiled financial records showing his wasteful spending, employee complaints documenting systematic harassment, and client feedback revealing that TechBridge was losing business due to his terrible leadership. But her most devastating evidence was the video footage from Derek's own surveillance system. The same cameras he'd installed to monitor employee productivity had recorded him taking credit for others' work, making discriminatory comments, and admitting to deliberately creating a fear-based culture to maintain control. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m. the next morning. Derek would be expecting a routine discussion about company strategy. Instead, he was about to face the professional destruction of a lifetime. Chapter 4: The Boardroom Massacre. Derek arrived at the emergency board meeting expecting to discuss minor administrative issues. He certainly wasn't expecting to see Rachel Morrison sitting at the head of the table in the chair usually reserved for him. "What is she doing here?" Derek demanded, looking at the board members for support. "I fired her yesterday for cause. She's no longer employed by this company." "Sit down, Derek," Board Chairman Robert Hayes said coldly. "We have things to discuss." Rachel remained silent, as Michael Chen stood to deliver the presentation that would destroy Derek's career in approximately 30 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I'm here to discuss the illegal termination of Rachel Morrison, majority shareholder of TechBridge Solutions, by CEO Derek Hunt. Michael began, displaying the first slide showing Rachel's 60% ownership stake. Derek's face went white as the implications became clear. Mr. Hunt terminated Ms. Morrison yesterday without board approval, without cause, and without apparently realizing that she owns this company, Michael continued. This represents a fundamental breach of corporate governance and potentially criminal fraud. The presentation that followed was a systematic destruction of Derek's entire tenure as CEO. Financial records showed he'd spent over $2 million on unnecessary consulting fees, paid to companies owned by his friends. Employee retention data revealed that turnover had increased 300% under his leadership, costing the company millions in recruitment and training. But the most damaging evidence was Derek's own words, recorded by the surveillance system he'd installed to spy on employees. The board watched in growing horror as video clips showed Derek taking credit for Rachel's software development in client meetings, telling his assistant to create paper trails that would justify firing employees he didn't like, admitting to deliberately creating fear to prevent employees from challenging his authority, making discriminatory comments about employees' age, gender, and appearance. This is where Derek's toxic leadership meets perfect documentation. If you're here for this level of boardroom justice, smash that subscribe button and let me know in the comments about bosses who destroyed themselves. In summary, Michael concluded, Derek Hunt has mismanaged this company into near collapse while enriching himself and his associates, violated multiple employment laws, and committed fraud by terminating the majority shareholder to cover up his misconduct. The board's vote to terminate Derek was unanimous and immediate. Chapter 5, The Company Collapse. Derek's termination was just the beginning of Rachel's revenge. She'd spent 18 months watching him destroy the company she'd built, and she'd decided that the best response wasn't to rebuild. It was to let everything collapse and ensure Derek would be forever blamed for the disaster. Rachel's first decision as reinstated CEO was shocking. She announced that TechBridge Solutions would be dissolved within 90 days, with all assets sold and employees given generous severance packages. This company's culture has been so thoroughly poisoned that rebuilding is impossible, Rachel told the shocked board. The best thing I can do for our employees and clients is to shut down gracefully rather than continue operating a toxic workplace. The decision was strategic and devastating to Derek's reputation. When news broke that TechBridge was closing specifically because Derek's mismanagement had made it unsalvageable, the business press coverage was brutal. CEO's toxic leadership forces company shutdown, read the Wall Street Journal headline. Employees celebrate as mismanaged tech firm closes rather than continue under destructive culture, announced TechCrunch. But Rachel's most satisfying revenge was the documentation she released publicly. With board approval, she published a detailed report explaining exactly why TechBridge was closing, a report that named Derek Hunt as the primary cause and included specific examples of his mismanagement, fraud, and abusive behavior. The report went viral in business and tech communities, with over 500,000 views in the first week. Derek Hunt's name became synonymous with catastrophic leadership failure. Meanwhile, Rachel was secretly negotiating with TechBridge's largest clients to transition their business to a new company she was founding, Phoenix Solutions, which would employ all of TechBridge's non-management staff and restore the collaborative culture Derek had destroyed. Derek's 18 months of taking credit for Rachel's work had convinced clients that he was the valuable asset. They were about to learn that Rachel had been the only thing keeping TechBridge functional, and without her, Derek had contributed absolutely nothing. Chapter 6, The Professional Destruction. Derek Hunt's career imploded with stunning speed. Within a week of his termination, 3 major business publications had published profiles detailing his toxic leadership and fraudulent management practices. His LinkedIn profile was flooded with comments from former employees sharing their own horror stories about working under his regime. But the legal consequences were far worse than the reputational damage. The board's investigation, prompted by Rachel's evidence, uncovered financial fraud that violated both corporate law and federal regulations. Derek had been funneling company money to personal accounts through fake consulting contracts with shell companies. Federal prosecutors charged Derek with wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. The total amount stolen, over $3.2 million during his 18-month tenure. Derek's professional network abandoned him immediately. The MBA program that had featured him as a successful alumnus removed his profile from their website. Companies that had courted him for speaking engagements canceled his appearances. The business press that had praised his transformational leadership now wrote exposés about his fraudulent career. Most devastating was the revelation that Derek's entire resume had been padded with lies. The 15 years at Fortune 500 companies included multiple terminations for poor performance that he'd concealed. The successful turnarounds he'd claimed credit for were actually companies that had failed shortly after his departure. Derek Hunt had built his career on taking credit for other people's achievements while destroying everything he touched, and Rachel Morrison's documentation had exposed every lie publicly and permanently. Meanwhile, Rachel's new company, Phoenix Solutions, launched with 90% of TechBridge's former employees and 80% of their client base. The workplace culture Rachel rebuilt emphasized collaboration, respect, and genuine appreciation for employees' contributions. Derek taught me an important lesson, Rachel told Business Insider during an interview about Phoenix's successful launch. Toxic leaders can destroy companies temporarily, but they can never destroy the talented people who create actual value. We're stronger now because we know exactly what kind of leadership to avoid. Chapter 7. The Viral Reckoning. Rachel's story exploded across social media when a former TechBridge employee posted the full timeline on Reddit's R-Work reform and R-malicious compliance. The post, titled "Boss Fired Company Owner," discovered he'd been working for her the whole time, received over 150,000 upvotes, and was shared across TikTok, Twitter, and LinkedIn. The story resonated with millions of workers who'd experienced toxic leadership and fantasized about seeing their terrible bosses face consequences. Comments flooded in from people sharing their own experiences with Derek Hunt-type managers who took credit while destroying workplace culture. "This is what revenge quitting should look like," one viral TikTok comment read. "She didn't just quit, she shut down the entire company and ensured her toxic boss could never work again." The quit talk trend embraced Rachel's story as the ultimate example of workplace justice. Dozens of workplace revenge content creators analyzed her strategy, praising the documentation, patience, and systematic destruction of Derek's career. But Rachel's most satisfying moment came when Harvard Business School contacted her about teaching a case study on toxic leadership and corporate governance. The same institution that had graduated Derek Hunt now wanted to use his catastrophic failure as a teaching example. "Students need to understand that leadership isn't about intimidation and credit stealing," Rachel explained during her first guest lecture. "Real leaders create value, develop people, and build cultures where everyone can succeed. Derek Hunt represents everything a leader should never be." This is what happens when toxic bosses fire the wrong person. If you're loving this workplace justice story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments about the worst boss you've ever had. Epilogue: Phoenix Rising. 2 years after Derek Hunt publicly fired her from the company she owned, Rachel Morrison stood before Phoenix Solutions' 200 employees at their annual celebration, reflecting on how destruction had led to something better than what came before. Phoenix Solutions had grown beyond TechBridge's former size, built on the foundation of genuine leadership and collaborative culture. Employee satisfaction scores were the highest in the industry. Client retention was over 95%. Revenue had tripled. Derek Hunt was serving a 4-year federal prison sentence for fraud and embezzlement. His career was permanently destroyed, his reputation ruined, and his name had become a cautionary tale in business schools worldwide. But Rachel's greatest satisfaction wasn't Derek's destruction. It was the transformation of how workplace culture was discussed in corporate America. Her story had inspired thousands of employees to document toxic leadership and demand accountability from management. "If my experience taught me anything," Rachel told her team, "it's that silence enables toxic people to destroy good companies. Documentation, patience, and strategic action protect everyone." Rachel had proven that the best revenge against toxic leadership isn't just destroying the individual who hurt you. It's building something so successful that their failures become obvious to everyone. The quiet IT manager who'd been publicly humiliated had become an industry leader whose story would be told for decades as proof that toxic bosses always underestimate the wrong employees, and workplace karma always finds its target. Sometimes the person you fire owns your job, your reputation, and your future. Derek Hunt had learned that lesson too late, and his catastrophic failure ensured that future toxic leaders would think twice before publicly destroying someone whose power they didn't understand. Thank you for watching Consequences & Co. This explosive workplace revenge story proves that toxic bosses who fire the wrong person don't just lose their jobs. They lose their entire careers, their freedom, and their reputations forever. If Rachel's transformation from fired employee to corporate justice warrior inspired you, smash that like button and let me know in the comments about your own toxic boss experiences. Subscribe for more incredible tales where workplace bullies get exactly what they deserve and quit talk revenge goes nuclear. Remember, document everything, stay patient, and never underestimate the quiet employee who might literally own your company. Subscribe now for more stories where workplace karma destroys toxic leadership.